So, Sabbath, why is it important for you to know the people you work with?
I have this issue. I assume things in the silence. So, therefore, the more I know about the people that I work with, the less room there is for me to assume the worst. And not that I'm judging them. I'm not a horribly judgmental person, but I just have all these thoughts running through what if this, what if that? How did I how could I have done something different or better or so that is why it's really important for me to know the people that I work with. And it also helps me to know how to ask for help or
Hmm.
how to word a text message in a way that's going to relieve pressure and also get things done.
You said we assume things in the silence, and it's such a powerful statement because so often in our world, I think we think about with the folks we work with that we either know them and they're a good friend, or there's a possibility that it's worse that they're actually an enemy, like that there's someone that cannot be trusted. But for most of us, isn't it true that we're walking around the workplace and we just simply don't know each other that well? And it's so funny that you think we would have solved this in our human experience, that we would have understand how to know each other at work. And this is why I'm excited for this podcast today, because we know that trust is built through knowing, through
Yeah.
understanding what is true and what is really happening and what is sometimes hard to unveil. But I think it's just hard for people sometimes to know people at work.
And the also the reality is that I hear you say often we can't know each other if we don't know ourselves. And so that is where the beginning of that knowing somebody else really starts, is knowing ourselves, which takes time and energy and honesty and vulnerability. And sometimes we say we don't have time for that at work.
Mhm.
So
Let's do
we
this.
don't get to know ourselves. Yeah, let's get this wild conversation started. Welcome to the Wild Conversation podcast, where human being and human doing converge, reshaping the world of leadership, culture, and performance. Today, we get to hear from Dr. Rob McKenna, who is named among the top 30 most influential IO psychologists and featured in Forbes. Dr. McKenna is the founder of Wild Leaders and the Wild Foundation, the creator of the Wild Trust platform. His recent TEDx, Becoming a Whole Leader in a Broken World, is a manifesto on the critical role that developing whole and intentional leaders will play in our future. Dr. McKenna has devoted his life to developing leaders and transforming the way we see the people in our organizations, seeing and developing them as whole. So here is Dr. McKenna.
Our world is so desperate for trust. We live at a time where most of us put people in boxes far too quickly. And we make the assumption that you are either my enemy or my friend. And those are the only two options. But what if this is a fatal flaw in our thinking? What if there's a third option? Our fight or flight responses are commonly referred to as reactions to fear. They're responses in us that cause us to act automatically as opposed to intentionally. They are defaults, not choices. And here's what's going on. When our amygdala perceives a threat, that part of our brain, it sends signals to other parts of the brain for the specific purpose of creating action and movement in the body. And two of the most common responses are fight or flight, to leave or to stand our ground. And without further training, our brains will alert our bodies to take action, to do something immediately based on those assumptions. And unfortunately, we don't have to be in a moment of intense fear to experience this dichotomization of possible reactions. And even in the workplace, the simple assumption of two polar options is really quite troubling. And while our experiences at work aren't life threatening on a daily basis, most typically, if we're honest with ourselves, fear is fully operating on most days. We fear having a tough conversation with our boss. We fear being laid off. We fear that people don't trust us. And we fear that others around us aren't trustworthy. And before we can ever get to the point of evaluating our options in a really intense fear based moment, we have to face the reality that there is something else going on. And in most cases, we are first evaluating whether the person we are facing is a friend or a foe, a person we can trust or someone we can't. And if they're a foe, we will either respond from a competitive mindset that we must win and they must lose, or from a defensive posture of protecting ourselves and hiding, to fight or to take flight and run from the interactions with that person. And if they're a friend, our assumption is that they are a person we already know, someone kindred, someone worthy of our kindness because we know them, we trust them, we can feel safe with them, we can work with them, we can be honest with them, and that they will do the same. But what if, just what if there is a third option? What if most of our interactions gone awry at work or in life have little to do with people being friends or foes, but simply people we don't know? People we don't know yet well enough to call them a friend or a foe. And if most of our interactions are like that, then what does it mean for trust? And the challenge with most people is that we simply don't know them very well. And when we don't know them very well, our relationship to them is built on a very slippery slope that can either level out and provide more security, or it can slip away quickly. And this is precisely why trust breaks down so quickly in many work environments. You see, people we don't know, unlike a friend or a foe, are on a very thin foundation with us. And when we don't know someone under pressure, our brains will move toward fear and hiding, forced to move in the dark, making assumptions in the shadows. And when the most common interactions like that begin to escalate, we will default to one of those two possible options, fight or flight. And either response is a response based on thousands of assumptions we make when we aren't working at telling the truth with each other and uncovering the reality of the thinking and feelings behind the responses that we see. And as teams and organizations, we are builders together. And we were not meant to build anything in the dark. We were meant to build in the light and in healthy relationship to one another. And to build well, we must trust each other. We must build in the light. We must build in the light and not in the invisible places of our brokenness. Our brokenness causes us to hide. We all have it. We all have places where we have regrets, or we have insecurities, or we have things that we've done wrong. And our brokenness causes us to hide too often, maybe to talk behind the backs of others, to see others as the enemy, to run from, to fight, or to hide from. And when left to ourselves, we will default to darkness, to making assumptions in the shadows, or to the feelings that have the power to take us over. That thing about light is so important, because if you think about it, when you walk into a very dark room with no windows, I had one of these in my house as a kid. I loved to go in there and just turn out all the lights, and it was pitch dark. Like you couldn't see your hand in front of you. And like everything else in life, light has to be intentionally inserted. Just like in that room when I was a kid, I had to turn on the lights. And as I said before, we are all builders. We are placed at the foot of a wall under construction. And most of us are a part of missional businesses that are doing something important in the world. And in almost every case, we were not placed at the foot of that wall alone. We were placed there together. In fact, when we find ourselves together working in an organization, that is our reality. We were placed at the foot of a wall together to build together. And at the foot of that wall is something else, a foundation that will change everything, that will allow us to not only build, but to build something that matters and something that is sustainable. To build an organization, we must trust each other. And to trust each other, we must know each other. And to know each other, we must know ourselves. We not only move into a fight or flight response to others, we go there in ourselves. We fail to know who we are and how we see our world and the impact of our experiences. And if we don't know ourselves and take a big step to do that, how can we ever be trusted? Because at the foot of that wall I was describing, that foot of that wall we are building together is a garden, the garden of trust, as we call it. Like the grass seeds in my yard I planted weeks ago that are still working hard and slowly to establish roots that will last. We must tend to trust and to relationships, to know each other and to know ourselves. We are builders and we are gardeners. We've moved massive actual stones in place to build our organizations, and we must work at the relationships. And the builder in us must get strong and courageous and full of conviction and clarity and make prophetic statements with urgency. We have to do that. We have to set up strong structures and operational systems. But the gardener in us must be vulnerable and open to weakness, full of patience and care and compassion. We must be clear and we must be kind at the same time. And that is the oldest formula in the world for leading well. We are builders and we are gardeners, building a wall and tending to a garden. We must be both. It is as old as time. It is at the foundation of 100 years of the study of leaders and of organizational functioning, and it is rooted in the genesis of humanity. Friend or foe, or a person I don't know. We must remain open to that third option because, especially at work, most of our relationships are with people we don't know well yet. Let me say that again. Friend or foe, or a person I don't know. We must remain open to that third option because, especially at work, most of our relationships are with people we don't know well yet. And if trust is the bridge between the building and the gardening, what do we know about it? We know that trust is your belief in my integrity, my ability, my reliability, and my strength, and your belief that I will tell you the truth when any of those things are lacking. There's so much truth in the light that makes trust. That's what builds trust. To trust a person is to know a person, and to know a person is to understand how each of these factors are functioning inside of them. It is to avoid the default to see them as someone to fight or someone to hide from, but as someone we could know. And the garden of trust is far too fragile and full of life to use harsh defaults to cultivate it. It must be tended to and tended to systematically while never losing sight of the individual. And I spent my entire adult career building a way for us to more intentionally know ourselves and begin to know each other at work and in our teams and in our organizations. And it is a way for us to take the best psychology in the world based on the oldest story in the world and build a way to develop leaders in our organizations, build whole and sustaining trust, and change the paradigm even in our universities and the places where we're educating our next generation. It affects our homes, our government, our business, and even in our not-for-profits. I always wanted to solve the problem and not simply put a Band-Aid on it. And that's why I built the Wild Trust platform. And while Wild Leaders is committed to not only understanding the realities of building whole and sustaining trust, but also the actions we can take to make a difference and to know each other. And here's the greatest thing about work. In most cases, at the very least, we are expected to learn something. Universities are the same way. They have a curriculum, an understanding within every student that on some level, they're expected to grow and to innovate and to change. And what is also amazing is that getting to know ourselves, to develop ourselves as leaders, starts with such basic things. In that way, knowing a person at work or in the classroom, isn't it amazing to think that our workplaces actually are in many ways like universities that way? In that way, knowing a person at work or in the classroom, at least we have an expectation of learning. And if trust is the goal and knowing ourselves and knowing each other are the pathways to it, let's focus our attention there. And that attention starts with an acceptance of the third option. We are not limited to seeing others as either friends or foes, but simply as people we don't really know yet.
Thank you for listening to this Wild Conversation podcast. Building trust in your business starts with being able to measure it so that you can create a pathway for change. Our Wild Trust Index measures the drivers of trust at the personal, team, and organizational levels. We are building the largest database on the drivers of trust inside of organizations. This survey will inform growth imperatives and the necessary organizational change needed to fuel that growth. For more information, visit wildleaders.org, click on the Wild Trust platform, and get started with the Wild Trust Index today.